All right, everybody, are you ready for another deep dive? This one is a big one. This time, we are really getting into it with Cosmos and Transcendence, breaking through the barrier of scientific belief, and we've got some other really fascinating texts to go along with it.
Yeah, we're talking big names too. We've got Descartes, Newton, Freud, Jung.
This is going to be quite the journey, that's for sure.
It really is remarkable, though, when you think about it, how thinkers from such diverse fields, across centuries even, were all grappling with these same fundamental questions, like what is reality, really? And what's our place in all of this?
Yeah.
The excerpts you shared, they really dig into the heart of scientific materialism and challenge its core assumptions. And that's something, honestly, that most people don't even realize needs to be questioned.
It's so easy to just kind of accept the scientific worldview as the be-all and end-all. It's like science equals truth. End of story. But doing this deep dive, it really exposes these underlying assumptions that we often just kind of gloss over. We're definitely not here to like bash science or anything. But we do want to explore, where are its limits? And what might lie beyond those limits, is where things get really interesting, maybe even a little mysterious.
I completely agree. And that's precisely where this book starts its exploration. It dives right into this concept of bifurcation,
Yeah.
tracing it all the way back to, well, you guessed it, Galileo and Descartes.
Okay, bifurcation. Now that sounds a little intimidating, like something you need a PhD to understand.
It might sound complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. It's basically this idea that reality can be split into these two separate categories,
Mm-hmm.
right? You've got the physical stuff, the things we can measure objectively, and then you've got everything else. So like thoughts, feelings, even our sensory experiences like colors and sounds.
I see.
It's kind of like saying, that your experience of a breathtaking sunset is somehow less real than the rocks you're standing on.
So essentially what we're saying is that science, in its quest for this objective truth, it might actually be overlooking a huge chunk of what actually constitutes reality.
That's exactly what the author is suggesting. And it gets even more interesting because the book highlights that even our understanding of the physical world, even that relies on certain assumptions.
Okay, I'm listening.
Take Newton's concept of matter, for example. He proposed this idea that matter exists independently of our minds. Like it's just out there, whether we're perceiving it or not. He even went so far as to say that what we experience as color or sound, those qualities, they actually only arise within a thinking substance in our brains.
So we're talking about a fundamental divide between mind and matter, subjective versus objective. But what does that even mean for me as a person living in the world?
Well, think about it this way. By drawing this hard line in the sand, we might actually be limiting our understanding of the universe and our place in it. And this leads to that classic clockwork universe model, remember? That idea that everything runs like a perfectly predictable machine, governed by these fixed laws. A concept that honestly dominated scientific thought for centuries.
Yeah, until quantum physics came along and basically threw a wrench in the whole thing, right? And those uncertainty principles we talked about, the ones that basically say we can never know both the position and momentum of a particle with perfect accuracy. This book links those directly to this idea that reality, at its core, is far more fluid and interconnected than we tend to think.
Exactly. And, even some of the biggest names in physics, like Heisenberg, they acknowledge this. Heisenberg himself said that what we observe isn't actually nature in its pure form, but rather our interaction with nature. It's like the observer and the observed, they're intertwined, they're inseparable. And that blurs the lines that we thought were so clear-cut.
It really is mind-boggling when you really start to think about it. It's like science itself is giving us these little hints, these glimpses that maybe, just maybe, we're missing a big piece of the puzzle. But this book doesn't just stop at physics, right? It goes on to explore how this shift in scientific thinking actually impacted our understanding of spirituality.
You're right, it does. The author connects this rise of this mechanistic worldview, this clockwork universe idea, with the decline of traditional religious belief. It's like, as we got better at explaining how things work, we kind of lost sight of the why.
Yeah, awe and wonder.
Exactly. We traded that in for this purely material explanation, this purely material perspective. And that's what the author argues, at least.
That's really interesting. Would you say that's what the book means when it talks about lost horizons?
Exactly. It argues that by focusing so intently on what we can see and touch, the tangible world, we've kind of forgotten about these deeper meanings, these deeper purposes, the ones that traditional cosmologies, with their stories of creation and the afterlife, they provided those kinds of answers, those meanings.
It does make you think, doesn't it?
Good.
But you know where it gets really interesting, at least for me? The book's take on Darwinism. I have to admit, I was a little surprised by this section. Because we're all taught evolution as fact, right? Like, it's just how things are. But this author, they present some pretty compelling arguments that challenge, well, what we might call conventional evolutionary theory.
Yeah, it's important to be precise here and distinguish between a couple of things.
Hmm.
When we talk about evolution, we could be talking about microevolution or macroevolution. Microevolution, that's those small changes that happen within a species over time. Like different breeds of dogs, things like that.
Right, right.
And then there's macroevolution. That's the idea that entirely new types of organisms, they can arise from existing ones. So we're talking about like fish evolving into amphibians and then eventually into mammals. Big leaps.
The book accepts microevolution, right?
The book accepts the idea of microevolution, those smaller changes, but raises questions about the evidence for macroevolution, those big jumps.
Because I was really struck by those points the author makes about the inconsistencies in the fossil record, particularly when it comes to those missing links. Like, where are the transitional forms that show these gradual changes happening over time?
Right, and that's a big one. The fossil record, it often tells a much more complex story than, say, a simple linear progression from one species to another.
Exactly. And then there's that whole thing about embryos, how they supposedly retrace their evolutionary history as they develop. Like, because we build a house from the ground up, every house has to have a basement, even if we don't see it.
That's a great analogy, because the author uses a really good example here. They talk about the fish stage in the development of vertebrate embryos. Right. This is something that's often cited as evidence for evolution, this idea that because vertebrate embryos share certain similarities at this early stage, it points to a common ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
But the book, it digs deeper and it points out that this fish stage, this is actually crucial for the development of all vertebrates, regardless of their supposed place on the evolutionary tree.
So it's not necessarily about a linear progression through time.
Right. It's more about the fundamental building blocks of life itself, the common patterns that underpin all of life.
So it's like the same evidence can be interpreted in these radically different ways. It all depends on the lens you're looking through, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this whole idea of questioning assumptions, it's not limited to just biology. The book takes a fascinating turn into the world of psychology, exploring how figures like, you guessed it, Freud and Jung, how they fit into this whole discussion.
Okay, Freud and Jung. Now we're really going deep. This is where my notes get a little fuzzy, to be honest. I feel like we're entering a whole new realm.
The book delves into how both Freud and Jung, they challenge this traditional view of the human psyche, of what makes us tick,
Okay.
Let's start with Freud. The book connects his concept of the id, that primal, instinctual part of us, the part driven by our desires. It connects that with the loss of the sacred. It's a really interesting connection.
So are we saying that, like, without a sense of something greater than ourselves, we're basically at the mercy of these primal urges? That's kind of a scary thought when you think about it.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. And this is where Jung enters the picture. He takes things even further with his theories of the collective unconscious and archetypes, these universal patterns of thought and behavior that he believed were shared by all of humanity.
So it's like he's saying there's this whole other layer of reality out there, this kind of shared reservoir of images and stories and patterns that we all tap into. It's a pretty wild concept when you think about it.
It is. In Jung, he saw the collective unconscious as a source of great wisdom and creativity. But this book, it doesn't shy away from the potential downsides.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that, by putting the unconscious on this pedestal, we risk falling into a kind of deification of our primal instincts.
So instead of looking outward to something greater than ourselves, we're turning inward and might end up getting lost in the shadows. It's like every time we find an answer in this book, it just leads to more questions.
It's a journey of exploration, that's for sure.
It definitely is. But I'm curious, how does it all tie together in the end? I mean, what are the implications of this scientistic worldview, as the book calls it, for society, for humanity as a whole? Where do we go from here?
That's where the book gets really thought-provoking, I think. It argues that this purely material view of reality, this idea that the physical world is all there is, that it's led us down a path where we've lost sight of what it truly means to be human.
And that this loss is reflected in our culture, in our values, in our everyday lives.
Exactly. The author points to our art, our education systems, even the way we structure our societies. It's like we've bought into this idea of progress, of technological advancement, but we've lost sight of the bigger picture.
It reminds me of that feeling of being like adrift, like we're surrounded by all this technology, all this stuff, but there's still this emptiness inside.
Yes, like we're constantly searching for something to fill that void.
And we try to fill it with things, right? With consumerism, with entertainment, with, yes, busyness. But it's never enough, is it?
The author would say that those things, they might offer temporary relief, but they can't address that deeper need that we all have, that longing for something more.
So if traditional religion isn't necessarily the answer for everyone, and this purely material worldview leaves us feeling empty, what's the alternative? Where do we even begin to look for that something more?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The book doesn't necessarily give us a step-by-step guidebook. It's not like, do this and then do that and you'll find enlightenment. It's more about opening ourselves up to new possibilities, to recognizing that the answers might not be found in a textbook or a laboratory.
It's about cultivating a different way of seeing.
Exactly, a different way of being in the world. The book talks about the importance of rediscovering the sacred in the everyday.
What does it mean, rediscovering the sacred? Can you give me an example?
Sure, it could be as simple as really paying attention to the beauty of a sunset, or marveling at the intricate design of a flower, or feeling a sense of gratitude for the people in our lives. It's about recognizing that there's this deeper dimension to reality, this interconnectedness, this wonder that's present in every moment if we just open ourselves up to it.
It's like we have to retrain ourselves to see it.
In a way, yes. We've become so accustomed to focusing on the problems, on the things that are wrong, that we've forgotten how to appreciate the beauty and the mystery that surrounds us.
It's like that saying, we're so busy looking for the keys that we've lost sight of the fact that we're already home.
That's a great way to put it. It's about remembering who we are, where we come from, and what we're capable of.
So it's not just about changing our minds, it's about changing our hearts as well.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It's about reconnecting with that sense of wonder and awe that we experienced so effortlessly as children before the world told us it was silly or childish.
But it's not just about individual transformation, is it? I mean, this book, it seems to be calling for something much bigger, something more like a collective shift in consciousness. Am I right?
You're picking up on something really important there. The author definitely sees this as a collective endeavor. They talk about the need for a cultural transformation, a move away from this narrow, materialistic worldview towards something more holistic, more compassionate, more in tune with the rhythms of the natural world.
It's about recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals, but part of something much larger than ourselves. Threads in this incredible tapestry of life.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have a responsibility to care for that tapestry, for ourselves, for each other, and for the planet we all share.
So where do we even start? I mean, it feels like such a monumental task, especially in a world that often seems so resistant to change. Where do we find the leverage to shift something so big?
The author uses this really interesting metaphor. They compare our current predicament to the story of Adam and Eve. Remember, after they eat from the tree of knowledge, they become aware of their nakedness, their vulnerability, and they feel this sense of shame.
It's like they realize they're separate, that they're no longer part of this, like, blissful state of unity with nature, with each other, with the divine.
Exactly. And they're cast out of the garden. And I think, metaphorically speaking, that's kind of where we are now. We've achieved all this knowledge, all this technological advancement, but in the process, we've become alienated from our true nature, from that sense of interconnectedness. And it's created this sense of unease, this feeling of being lost.
It's like we traded paradise for a bite of the apple, and now we're stuck dealing with the consequences. But is there a way back? Can we ever really return to that state of grace? Or are we doomed to wander this, like, existential wilderness forever?
The book offers a message of hope. Just like Adam and Eve had the capacity for repentance, for acknowledging their mistakes and trying to make amends, we too have the power to choose a different path. We can choose to realign ourselves with our true nature. It starts with awareness, with recognizing that the way we've been conditioned to see the world, it might not be the whole picture, that there might be a different way.
It's like we need to develop a kind of spiritual immunity to all the messages telling us that happiness is about acquiring more things, achieving more status, being more whatever.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because it's about learning to discern, you know, to figure out what truly nourishes us, what brings us genuine joy and fulfillment, and what's just keeping us stuck on this treadmill of craving and dissatisfaction.
It's not about rejecting technology or progress outright. It's
Yep.
about using these tools wisely, consciously, about remembering that we're not just consumers, we're creators. We have the power to shape the world we want to live in.
I completely agree. And that requires a shift in our values. We have to start prioritizing things like compassion, connection, creativity, wisdom, those qualities that have always been at the heart of what it means to be truly human.
It's about rediscovering what it means to live a good life, a meaningful life,
Yeah,
the life that's in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us.
exactly.
It's like we're talking about bridging this gap, not just between different ideas, but between like different ways of being in the world,
Yeah.
different ways of experiencing reality.
You've got it. And that's what makes this book so compelling, I think. It's not about handing us a new set of beliefs on a silver platter. It's not about saying, this is the truth, now go forth and believe it.
Yeah.
It's more about, like, cracking open a window in our minds and letting in some fresh air. It's about inviting us to question everything we thought we knew and be open to new possibilities.
It's like instead of just giving us the answers, it's handing us a map and a compass and saying, go explore, discover for yourself.
Exactly. The author really emphasizes that the answers we seek, the real deep down answers, they're not always going to be found through pure intellect, or through just analyzing data. It's about cultivating what they call gnosis, this kind of knowing that goes beyond just the rational mind. It involves intuition, lived experience, and a willingness to embrace the mystery of it all.
It's like that feeling you get when you look up at a sky full of stars, right? You're just kind of, awestruck. And it's a feeling that you can't really put into words. It transcends language, transcends explanation. But I wonder, in our modern world, with our obsession with technology, with our need to define and categorize everything, have we lost touch with that sense of wonder? Have we forgotten how to just be in awe of the mystery of it all?
It's a valid question. And the author would probably say that, yes, to some extent we have. That by overemphasizing the rational mind and immersing ourselves in this culture of, instant gratification and material acquisition, we've kind of numbed ourselves to the magic of being alive, to the sacredness that's woven into the very fabric of existence. But the good news is that capacity for wonder, it never really goes away. It's still there within us, waiting to be rekindled. So how do we fan those flames again? How do we reconnect with that sense of the sacred in a world that often feels anything but sacred? What are some practical things we can do? The book offers some really beautiful practices. One of the simplest but perhaps most profound is just cultivating presence, really paying attention to the world around us, noticing the way the light filters through the leaves on a tree, savoring the taste of a ripe strawberry, listening to the laughter of a loved one. It's about slowing down, tuning into our senses, and appreciating the extraordinary in the ordinary.
It's about seeing the world through the eyes of a child again, isn't it? With that sense of curiosity and wonder.
Exactly. We all had that capacity once. Somewhere along the way, for many of us, it got buried under the weight of responsibilities and to-do lists and the constant barrage of information. But it's still there. It just takes a little effort to unearth it, to dust off and bring it back to life.
It's like we need a mental detox, a digital detox, a soul detox.
I love that. A soul detox. I think that's what this book is really calling for, in a way. It's about clearing away the clutter, the noise, the distractions, and reconnecting with what truly matters, with ourselves, with each other, with that something larger that we're all a part of. And that, I think, is a beautiful place to end our deep dive.
It really is. This has been quite the journey. We've covered so much ground, explored some really big questions, and I have to admit, I'm walking away with even more questions than I started with. But isn't that the beauty of it all? That this exploration, this quest for understanding, it's a lifelong journey. It's not about finding all the answers, but about embracing the mystery, the unknown.
It definitely is. And it's a journey we don't have to take alone. There are so many wise voices out there, past and present, offering guidance and inspiration. All we have to do is be open to listening, to learning, to expanding our hearts and minds. The cosmos, in all its wonder and beauty, is waiting to be explored.
So to you, our listener, we leave you with this. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep that sense of wonder alive. The journey itself is the destination.